Much has been said about the many freighters in Star Wars, but some of the most important cargo in the galaxy comes in liquid form. Blue milk, green milk, probably other colors of milk, etc. Today, let's examine some of the ships that transport these valuable substances around. I am Joey from Radio Free Coruscant, and these are the best tankers in Star Wars. Rebel Tanker. First up is the first ever tanker in Star Wars, this unidentified starship from the Rebel fleet in The Empire Strikes Back. Now, this ship isn't officially known to be a tanker. In fact, it has never been officially recognized in any official Star Wars media at all, but it is there, and it is something, and that something certainly looks like something you would call a tanker. However, despite its apparent obscurity, I would be willing to bet you might recognize this ship anyway, as it was one of the background ships covered by E.C. Henry in his series fleshing out the various mystery ships of the original trilogy. Generally speaking, I don't include fan-made ships in my videos, and this could arguably be considered one of those, since everything we know about it besides its general shape was invented by E.C. Henry, but it deserves to be included due to its historic nature, and it would be silly of me to come up with my own interpretation of it when E.C. Henry's is so well known. You will of course need to go watch the original video on it to get the full details, but I will at least give you a summary of the relevant information for the ship as a tanker. The unidentified Rebel tanker, or Corsair S-580 medium hauler, was a modular, optionally automated cargo ship capable of carrying a wide variety of mission modules for various tasks, including liquid storage. Some of these ships were outfitted with large exterior cargo container racks. Many of them carried solid cargo inside their pods, but the most famous of these, and the ones most commonly used by the Rebel Alliance, were converted to carry fuel or other valuable liquids. They were extremely durable and easy to service thanks to their incredibly simple bare-bones design. The Rebels modified these ships into in-flight refueling tankers for servicing their many loose starfighters. The S-580 measured about 39.6 meters long by 22 meters wide and 12.5 meters tall, at least based on E.C. Henry's model of the configuration used by the Rebellion. The ship had an anemic Class 4 hyperdrive, though an unusually stable one that was hard to catch with an interdictor vessel. Its top speed was unknown, but it was relatively fast at a cost of having very low acceleration and poor throttle control. It was likely unarmed by default, but even a simple freighter or tanker version could be modified to include a dual turbo laser turret for defense, and more ambitious pirates or rebels looking to turn such an unassuming vessel into a sleeper ship were known to install more weapons and extra engines to improve its maneuverability. The ship required 4 crew originally, though it could be outfitted to be droid-operated instead. It was not capable of carrying passengers by default, but passenger modules could be installed in place of the cargo or tank modules if preferred. And speaking of which, each of its 4 semi-conical modules had a volume of 150 cubic meters for a total of 600 cubic meters. This would probably yield a cargo capacity of around 400 tons. As a tanker, though, 600 cubic meters of fuel would be equivalent to about 600,000 liters, or 158,500 gallons. And that's just with the standard 4 conical pods. Additional cylindrical pods could easily be added in between them to extend its cargo or fuel capacity to a virtually unlimited degree. It's hard to assign a price to such a customizable vessel, as it is probably quite likely that no 2 Corsair medium haulers were identical or had an identical value. Still, I would guess that the base model S-580 with all the default options would probably run somewhere around 100,000 credits new or 35,000 used. YV-664. Next up is another tanker that isn't officially a tanker, but very clearly is one anyway because just look at it, namely the Corellian Engineering Corporation YV-664 light freighter. Other than the fact that it exists and looks like this, we honestly don't really know much more about it than the Rebel tanker. It was officially classified as a light freighter, but had 4 very prominent tanks in the front of its main hull, and 2 tubes running through its mandibles that I can only conclude are pipes for filling and emptying them. If it were exclusively a tanker, though, it would be classified as such, meaning it was likely a hybrid model that could carry both liquid and solid cargo at the same time. That is going to become a theme among these ships, but it seems particularly useful on such a small one. This would make it great for delivering things that are only needed in relatively small amounts at a time. In particular, I could see it being very good for delivering Bacta and other resources to remote hospital facilities that don't need to be topped off very often, and don't use much Bacta at a time to need a larger vessel to deliver it. A monthly visit from a YV-664 would be more than enough to keep something like the remote Polis Massa research base that Luke and Leia were born in stocked with supplies. The YV-664 would probably also be useful to small-time farmers bringing liquid goods to market. A moisture farmer or bantha rancher on Tatooine could use a ship like this to deliver their water or blue milk to customers, as well as any other goods they produce. While obviously its small size limits your opportunities, it would be a perfect entry-level tanker for those who need one. The YV-664 measured somewhere around 34 meters long by 24 meters wide and 6.8 meters tall, assuming a cockpit and airlock around the same size as those of the YT-1300. Given its structural similarities to that vessel, it would be reasonable to assume most of its other stats were similar as well, giving it a Class 2 hyperdrive and a top atmospheric speed of 800 kilometers per hour. It was armed with 1 or 2 dual laser cannon turrets, and probably required a crew of 2. It is possible that it could carry 6 passengers like the YT-1300, but I would guess that it probably sacrifices passenger capacity for liquid cargo space instead. The 4 tanks can seemingly hold around 21 cubic meters of liquid, for a total of 84 cubic meters, 84,000 liters, or 22,190 gallons. It could likely also carry around 75 to 100 tons of solid cargo. Due to the tanks and the liquid handling system, it probably cost a bit more than the YT-1300, perhaps around 120,000 credits new, or 30,000 used. Phelarion. Moving on to a proper tanker ship, the Rendili Star Drive Phelarion-class fuel tanker was a fantastic mid-sized model. Like basically all other tanker ships in Star Wars, very little is known about it, but there is some information we can glean from its appearance that may tell us everything we need to know. For starters, its hull was extremely similar in design to that of the Corellian Engineering Corporation Action 6 bulk transport. I suspect that it was actually meant to be a spin-off of that design by the comic artists that created it, but the team that wrote the Star Wars encyclopedia that its name and manufacturer were revealed in didn't notice, and came up with a new designation for it. The differences between the two are substantial enough that I have no problem believing it is a separate ship from a different company that just happens to look similar, but they are similar enough that I think we can apply some of what we know about the Action 6 to the Phelarion. For example, the Phelarion could likely carry a considerable amount of internal cargo like the Action 6 could, though probably not as much. This would make it a very useful multi-purpose vessel, as fuel is rarely the only consumable a ship or starbase needs. Interestingly, the Phelarion was equipped with a small hangar bay capable of carrying at least 3 T-70 X-Wing starfighters. This was likely intended for some kind of shuttle or landing craft, as I doubt the Phelarion was capable of landing itself. It wouldn't surprise me if it could, but its 2 enormous underslung fuel cylinders and lower engines would make engineering landing gear for it quite tricky. But anyway, the hangar could also be used to store a smaller shuttle and a couple of light starfighters to defend the vessel from pirate attacks instead. The Phelarion likely measured around 120 meters long by 48 meters wide and 32 meters tall, based on comparisons to the X-Wings it is seen with in the comic it is from. That would make it just barely larger than the Action 6, and certainly well within the margin of error for it to be the exact same size, not including the tanks. Like the Action 6, it probably had a top speed of 650 km per hour and a Class 3 hyperdrive. It probably also had somewhere around the same 8 crew, 0 passengers, and 3 months of consumables, but not as much cargo. Perhaps 20,000 tons of cargo to the Action's 80,000. As for liquid cargo, its two tanks each had a rough volume of around 6,600 cubic meters, assuming they had fairly thick outer walls. That would give it a total fuel volume of 13,000 cubic meters, 3.5 million gallons, or 13 million liters. The Action 6 had a shockingly low price of just 200,000 credits, which I don't think the Phelarion would share. If the slightly simpler Action 6 cost that much, the Phelarion would probably cost around 300,000 credits new, or 150,000 used. Darius G. Another similar ship to the Falarion is the Darius G-class freighter. This was a large cargo ship that came in several different configurations, one of which was a tanker variant capable of carrying a large amount of fuel, water, or whatever other liquids you need. In fact, the G-class was unique among the tankers on this list in that it had many medium-sized tanks rather than just a few large ones. This would give it the option of carrying various types of liquids at once, like a giant soda fountain. Realistically, I don't think you would want to carry completely different things, like fuel in one, water in another, Bacta in a third, shampoo in a fourth, etc., but you could certainly use it to carry multiple types of one liquid. Different types of fuel, different strengths of industrial chemicals, different colors of milk, that sort of thing. Like many other tanker models, the G-class was also seemingly capable of carrying internal cargo. The standard cargo variants of the G-class carried most of their freight in 4 to 8 rows of external cargo pods, but they still had room inside for miscellaneous loose containers as well. Assuming the tanker retained the same internal structure as the cargo versions, this space would still be open for making cargo deliveries alongside fuel or whatever. Conceivably, it could be converted to an additional couple of internal tanks, but that seems like it would be a lot of work to build and annoying to work around for the crew of the ship, so it's much more likely that the space is still available. Like the others, the Darius G's size and other stats are unknown to us, but I would guess it to measure around 215 meters long by 60 meters wide and 50 meters tall. It probably had a Class 2 or 3 hyperdrive and a top atmospheric speed of 700 km per hour. It seemed to require 18 crew since it carried 18 single-occupant escape pods, and could potentially carry some passengers as well if it had additional multi-person escape pods that we can't see, or if its crew count was lower than its escape pod seating. The original G-class cargo capacity may have been somewhere around 50 to 100,000 tons, but I would expect the tanker version to carry no more than 10 to 20,000 tons of cargo. Assuming my size estimations and modeling job of the ship are accurate, each of its tanks had a volume of around 4,500 cubic meters. Multiplied by its impressive array of 15 tanks, that would give it a total liquid cargo volume of about 67,500 cubic meters, 67.5 million liters, or 1.8 million gallons. The price of the G-class is just as much of a mystery as the rest of its stats, but I would guess it to be around 500,000 credits new, or 200,000 used. Altor. And finally, one of the best tanker ships in the galaxy is the Altor-class replenishment ship. Bigger isn't always better, but it does land the Altor at the final spot on this list. This Texas-sized tanker was designed by Star Wars fan modeler Ansel Xiao, and was eventually made an official Star Wars ship in the Essential Guide to Warfare. He intended for the vessel to be capable of replenishing one Executor-class Star Destroyer at a time, or an entire fleet of smaller ships. It was nearly 3 times as long as the Imperial Star Destroyer, and its volume was almost entirely dedicated to storage for fuel and supplies to distribute to Imperial vessels. It had several dry docks at the rear for docking and repairing frigate-scale vessels, and 6 enormous arms for refueling larger ships. I would imagine it also had a hangar for personnel shuttles and repair craft working on ships that couldn't fit in its dry docks, tugboats to assist with docking, and likely a large amount of freight storage for solid goods like food and parts to deliver. The Altor-class was also seemingly available for sale to the public, though the cost of it was surely astronomical. One of these was commanded by a rebel sympathizer who used the ship to deliver fertilizer to algae farming stations in the Coruscant system. Around 3 or 4 ABY, he also smuggled the Millennium Falcon and 3 A-Wings into the system so they could carry out an attack on Coruscant. I wouldn't have thought a ship this large and specialized would be available outside of Imperial control, but I suppose it is relatively harmless and very useful for resupplying enormous farming operations, such as those that support the impossibly vast resource black hole that is Coruscant. Then again, it's also possible that the captain of that particular vessel was an Imperial official, who also happened to secretly defect to the Alliance. Farming on the scale required to feed Coruscant would probably have been run by the government due to the sheer scale of it, especially in the Imperial era. The Altor doesn't seem like something that would be sold to civilians, but it did have non-military applications, so you never know. Before I tell you the Altor's stats, I feel like I haven't properly communicated the vast scale of this ship. I know I've mentioned that it was big several times, but it dwarfs even a Star Destroyer. All of the other ships on this list combined would fit inside just one of its fuel pods many times over, which were each larger than most other ships in general at a size of over 900 meters long by about 375 meters in diameter. The ship overall was roughly the size of the main metropolitan area of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, or Jackson, Wyoming. It was nearly 3 times as long as a Star Destroyer, or a bit longer than a Lupus-class battleship. The Altor was basically the tanker equivalent of a dreadnought. The Altor-class measured 4,600 meters long by about 2,170 meters wide and 1,250 meters tall, with its arms in the retracted position. Its other stats are entirely unknown, but I would guess it to have a Class 3 hyperdrive and a top speed of 650 km per hour. It is unclear if the ship was armed with any defensive weapons, but I certainly don't see any on it. It could potentially have carried starfighters or even an entire frigate in one of its hangars to protect it, though that doesn't seem to be the case either. The ship's crew requirements were probably huge, but it is certainly possible that many systems were automated and the total crew was a lot less than you'd think. Still, even with that in mind, its crew was probably anywhere between 10 and 100,000 officers, engineers, technicians, and various other positions. The ship could likely carry passengers to replenish the crew and troops of Star Destroyers and other ships after battle, probably at least 10 to 50,000. Its solid cargo capacity would surely have been over 100,000 tons, but its liquid cargo is the real number of interest. Even accounting for fairly thick tank walls, each of its 6 fuel pods would have a capacity of around 65 million cubic meters, 17.2 billion gallons, or 65 trillion liters. Determining the price of such a complex logistics vessel is extremely difficult, but given its size I would expect it to cost somewhere around double the price of an Imperial Star Destroyer, or 300 million credits. If Altors were indeed available on the civilian market, they would probably also go for 100 million used. And those are 5 of the best tankers in Star Wars. Let me know which of these was your favorite, or what else you'd have included instead. There aren't many other tankers, but there are a few. If you liked this video, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss more like it in the future. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. RFC, out.